sorts. It's a slightly smaller panel than we'd had before. But I know it's going to be a great conversation nonetheless, because the topic is all about the alchemy of VC in Africa. So again, one of those where our entrepreneurs' ears pick up when the letters VC gets mentioned. So guys, pens and papers ready. I know that we're going to have a short time for a Q&A as well with our two amazing speakers over here. So I'm going to ask you to make them feel welcome. Firstly, from Digital Africa, we've got Stefan Alois Gra, as well as from AfricInvest, Khaled Ben Jilani.
Thank you.
So hi everyone, my name is Khaled Ben Jilani. I work at AfricInvest, and we've been working together since the beginning of the year on several projects to try to develop the digital ecosystem and the entrepreneurship ecosystem in Africa. So rather than talking about boring things, you're going to talk about, you had lunch, you didn't have dessert like myself. So we're going to talk about a cake recipe. And we try to make an interesting cake recipe, and this recipe should be about how to make an interesting ecosystem in Africa. In a cake, let's say, who likes chocolate cake here? Okay, everyone, that's great. So let's take the chocolate recipe. You would need probably ingredients, you need the recipe, and you need also some toppings to make it beautiful. And this is exactly the same thing in a digital ecosystem. You probably need people, talents, HR, which is basically the recipe, the flavor, the consistency of what you want to create. That is really about the people. But then you need money. And the money is really the ingredients. You need to be able to buy them and to cook them. And so you need also the capital. And at the end of the day, all of this will be actually in an ecosystem or in an environment where you have laws, regulations, and policies that will be dictating, sometimes putting hurdles to what you can actually create. And I think the mission of Digital Africa is to define what kind of cake we want to cook in Africa for startups and for innovation. That's more or less I would say, a summary of what Digital Africa is doing. So I will have the pleasure, together with you, to cook this lady next to me for the next 20 minutes. And so whatever question that you may have, you're free to ask them with me. But let's first try to understand what Digital Africa is about and what they do. So I think if you can just first summarize in 2 words what's your mission and what kind of cake you want to cook.
I see Digital Africa more as a fondant or a mousse rather than maybe something too heavy or too, like undigestible. But, it's a question of taste. So also some people might not love chocolate as much as you do, Khaled. But thanks for the metaphor. So yeah, Digital Africa, what is a recipe for, sustaining digital innovation ecosystem? I don't think we have the answers ourselves. And I think the ingredients are all around us, especially starting with you. So I'm happy to be able to have this conversation with Khaled, who is not only a famous VC and investor in Africa, but also one of the brain behind the Startup Act in Tunisia. So really, how do you design an innovation ecosystem? But let's start with the beginning. So
to start with, we need obviously people. I mean, this is really the heart of an ecosystem is basically its community. And often what we hear, at least not only in Africa, but in several ecosystems, is that we're missing talents. So the question is, how, with the tools that you have, how could you build a better pool of talents? How can you create skills, leadership that are needed basically to build the companies of tomorrow?
Yes. You've said it. I mean, probably the main ingredient for a digital innovation ecosystem, but also for a startup, is competencies and people. So at Digital Africa, we gave ourselves a really tangible objective in sustaining and supporting digitally enabled startup in scaling their businesses. So what does it mean? It means access to talent, it means access to market and visibility, and it means technical assistance on some specific key area for digital innovation. So one of the let's say One of the ingredients is the jobs. So, you know, like the startup economy in Africa more specifically needs specific competencies, like whether coming from early stage and also this is important, like the size of the cake for Digital Africa, it goes from pre-seed to early growth. So let's say seed to Series B. So this cake is not, you know, like as massive as other cakes can be. And I would say, so we started, for example, this year with, we're launching a scholarship program for training to digital jobs and then connecting them with a startup of our ecosystem who needs, for example, product manager, who needs good digital marketers, who need maybe some like Java or full stack developers or data scientists. So we will be launching this program early 2021. And we hope this is very much the first ingredient for starting this cake. And then we will be also working with all, you know, all the chain of, you know, innovation ecosystems, meaning incubation and acceleration. So we are working together with several incubators across the continent, and one of our fellow founders is actually AfriLabs, so we are already working with several hubs. To launch incubation and acceleration program that will end up with all the Digital Africa funding capacity operated by our fellows Proparco and partners Proparco. The last or two last thing that we are looking at for startups and support to startups in Africa is technical assistance in access to data, and this is also something quite important for a digital innovator. How do you train your model? How do you train your algorithm? How do you make sure that the ingredient that you have in your own cake and that we're going to all bring together in this giant cake is healthy enough to be eaten, and it's also that there's an appetite for it. So we are working on a pilot program for giving and facilitating access to open data set for agriculture, for startups in the agriculture sector. And we will be launching that. It's called the Data for Digital Africa program. So those are the kind of programs we're running. But of course, this is, you know, the beginning of the cake. And the second aspect that we are looking at is funding and sourcing access to funding. And this is where you and I have been already discussing a lot, so I don't know what kind of magic recipe you want to, uncover now.
So yeah, so we have the people, and obviously people will need money to develop their startups and their endeavor, and so if we compare, for instance, Africa to Europe, I think last year there was about $2 billion that was invested in VC in Africa. 40 billion in Europe, so a ratio of 20 times. And if you compare this to the size of the population, this is probably twice the population in Africa versus Europe. So the gap is quite big. It's the 100 times, basically, if you bring this by capita. So greed, there's a great growth, but how could you help, basically, make this, the flow of capital that is coming into innovation? Because often what we hear is that a lot of the money that invests in Africa is invested into infrastructure, invested into the private sector, but the traditional private sector, there's still innovation and startup come third to fourth to that. How could you help with that?
So one of the recipe we've used is just basic community building of VC and accelerators. And online gathering is a little bit like what AfricArena is doing, trying to connect all, AfricArena's like event and ecosystem players across the continent. So we've launched actually with AfricInvest and BPI France, Africa Next. Africa Next is an online community of accelerators and VCs meeting every 3 months and sharing co-investment opportunities. So what we ask here is to really, trust your fellow VC and trust accelerators and build a trust system among all these actors. And by co-opting themselves as member of the community, we source some of their best portfolio company and invite them for a pitch session in front of like very selected community of VC and accelerators who might be interested in joining the round for investment. These are one of the recipe we've applied, but we have also other ideas, and we're actually building other tools and innovative tools for access to finance. So for example, with Proparco, we've launched recently the Bridge Fund. So this is more related to the, hello. We've launched, taking into account the situation with COVID and the contraction of the investment market due to the current economic crisis. We've decided that we needed to act fast, and as you all know, DA5s are not famous for, and it's not why they are here for. They're not here for fast and being able to act in emergency situation, but more like rather long term. But we've managed to build this thanks to co-investment again, building this co-investment community and trusting that what VC and fellow VCs are doing across the continent can support already the best companies who need cash to go through the situation, the pandemic situation. So the Bridge Fund was launched in early November with an 8 weeks window for the investment for the first pocket of investment, meaning that you can test your eligibility online, and from there, if you're eligible, if Proparco has 8 weeks to contact you and make sure that you will get the fundings in the next couple of months, weeks actually. So this is what we are doing in terms of like access to funding, and really like, again, I insist, co-investment. Like there's no good, just good recipe without good ingredient, and for the good ingredient, we need to trust, peer-to-peer knowledge and knowledge sharing, and like believing that if your chocolate in your fridge is as good as my flour. Wow, this metaphor, we should stop with it. It's actually, but let's take the best of us and the best of you, and mix it together. And this is what we're trying to do. And finally, also maybe the let's say the little cherry on the cake. How do we package the cake? How do we make it like as good as it is and look as good as it is for other investors who might not be French, who might not be AfricInvest, who might not be part of our community, but who might be believing and buying the same values as we have and wanting to, invest in the amazing startups in the African ecosystem today. So we are launching in 21 the DA54, which is basically a ranking of the 54 best early stage startups that we believe the investment community needs to hear about, and the DA5, which is the best 5 next unicorns in Africa, and we want to give them their best chance to have access to mentoring and have access to very high level networks to be visible and meet some of the investors of the Digital Africa funding capacities, but also other friends from our communities.
Thank you. So lots of new projects coming on the funding side. Now, when you're a startup, you start somewhere, and in that somewhere, usually you have laws and regulation, and often that do not match basically the innovative models that you may have. And not only this, but you have not one regulation, but 54 countries in Africa and 54 laws. So it makes things even more complicated. So the evolution of these policies is probably as important as the funding that comes into it. How can we basically, or could you basically help these regulations be more startup friendly and more innovation friendly?
So actually, I think this is a question for you, Khaled, because I think from what I can say, and we'll probably have to end up on this note, but I want to hear you, because Digital Africa is a proxy, meaning that we can only connect knowledge and dots of existing experiences that have worked in terms of building and sustaining innovation ecosystem. And you're from Tunis, so how did you do? And we know that Tunis today and Tunisia has an amazing and has been able to showcase an amazing digital innovation ecosystem in very short term. So how did you do?
So Tunisia is this very small country, is exactly at the opposite of the continent, for those who don't know it. And so we have great education and engineers, but we didn't have startups, and they thought there is a problem somewhere. And so we tried to analyze why there was not enough deal flow of entrepreneurs and startups. And so the laws for companies in Tunisia have been basically written after independence and have been inherited from the French system, which is the civil law, which is extremely complex and bureaucratic, basically, to set up a company, to grow it, to change it, and all of the agility that you're looking for as entrepreneurs, you lose it basically spending your own time from an administration to another. What we decided was, with other entrepreneurs and other operators in the ecosystem, is to try to have this communication and this brainstorming with the government to tell them, we need better laws for us. That's basically the way we did it. And rather than this being a decision of the government, we tried to push a process that was a bottom-up process, meaning the propositions did not emanate from the government, but emanate from the community. And so we organized ourselves. We started with 100 people. We had started with 300 good and bad ideas put on the table. And we started this brainstorming, then this rationalizing, I would say, of these ideas into measures. And the measures happened to be extremely coherent with the life cycle of an entrepreneur and how they would start from an idea, concept, company, grow the market, and we've tried to look at the different hurdles that exist in the different laws to basically to make this journey a bit easier. I mean, this is just to define. But the measures are not important. I think it's a process that is important, is what can be applied somewhere else, learning from that process. I think the fact that the community knows its problem and actually can articulate this into a policy is something that should be redone in other countries. So this is at the local level. The second issue that I see is an important issue that we face as part of the African entrepreneurship ecosystem is that every startup needs scales. And the problem of scaling up in Africa is that you have to scale across these damn 54 countries. And it's a headache. Where you face, if you're in fintech, you face different set of regulations. Of course, you have regions, but this doesn't simplify things because the interesting countries are in different regions. And so if you want to go from South Africa to Nigeria, to Kenya, to Morocco, to Egypt, you can't. And I'm talking about the laws on how to hire foreign people in a country, which is even more complicated in our countries. And this is something that I think needs to be tackled. So if you think that as a community, African community, I'm looking at Christophe who's on his phone right now, if you are trying to, I think it's important to try to harmonize basically these laws, maybe creating, we were discussing over lunch with our friends from Propaco, an African jurisdiction for startups to simplify basically the way these startups will be evolving. A bit like what the US has been doing in the 2000s, where basically trying to harmonize fiscality for e-commerce. I think something like this has to happen so that we try to have a simpler evolution. Things like banking regulation compliance is a headache. Opening a bank account in a different country, when you come from DRC into Kenya, you're seen as someone who is not trustful. So we need to simplify this approach. And so this is probably where you should be able to help.
Yes, we are actually looking at this area, like how do we build Pan-African legal and regulative framework with, like thought leadership, but also by sharing experiences across, Cape Town, Tunisia, Abidjan, or Nairobi. So I hope we will see you, like across all these conversations about, what is necessary to be, what are the ingredients actually of a good digital innovation ecosystem, because only local players know what is necessary for their local market. So let's have a cake.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stefano, Luis, and Khaled. Can we please give them a big round of applause? We're going to have to leave it over there.